This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Welcome to the banks of the Thames at Vauxhall in central London. It's 7 o'clock in the morning, and in less than an hour's time, a mysterious structure, a series of 3,500-year-old wooden posts, will begin to emerge from the receding waters. Could these Bronze Age remains be part of a building? Maybe they supported a pier from which votive objects like this beautiful spearhead were offered to the Thames. Or just perhaps they're all that remains of London's first bridge. As usual, Time Team have got just 3 days to find out. But because we're dealing with tidal waters, we can only get at this structure for 2 hours every day. So can we solve this mystery with just 6 hours digging? This is a race against time like never before. The moon hasn't even set behind Battersea Power Station, but the Vauxhall foreshore is already awash with our digging team. Ahead of them is a challenge unlike any other we've attempted, to investigate a complex structure accessible for only 2 hours each day during daylight. It may have been these beautiful Bronze Age spearheads that alerted us to this site, but it's these rather shabby lumps of wood emerging from the Thames that's got everyone excited. There's always timbers coming up in the river, aren't there? What's so special about these ones?
Well, that's right, Tony. It's the apparent association of the timbers with these two bronze spearheads. That's the key thing. That's what we're after, trying to unravel this weekend. Now, when the timbers came up, I mean, they're big, they're round, they're very low down on the foreshore. And when we had the spearheads brought into us, we weren't sure whether there was any clear association with them. But the radiocarbon dates that we had back had tied them quite nicely to the date of the spearheads. That's the key thing.
Since the Thames revealed the structure in 1993, 22 timbers have been recorded. Carbon dating confirms that they're up to 3,500 years old, and their configuration suggests they could be the remains of a building, a jetty, or even a bridge. Our dig will be the first full investigation into this site, and although it's survived 3.5 millennia, this may be the last chance anyone has to study it.
The whole reason that we can see the piles today is because the river is eroding the foreshore on top of them. So once the foreshore, which has sealed them for 3,000 years, has been washed away, then the river starts on the piles themselves, and it's eating those away as well. So they've only got a limited life.
History Hit is like Netflix, just for history fans. With exclusive history documentaries covering some of the most famous people and events in history, just for you. Our extensive catalogue of documentaries covers everything from the rise of Hannibal Barca to the illustrious treasures of King Tut. So sign up today for broadcast quality documentaries uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Odyssey fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Odyssey at checkout.
We're starting our investigation into this mysterious structure by looking at one post in particular to see what it can tell us about this possible building, jetty or bridge. The top of the one we've chosen appears to be in good condition, but the eroding shoreline means it may not survive much longer if we don't remove and preserve it.
What's the strategy, Ian? You're gonna hack all that top off first?
We want to get a slot off.
Yeah.
We're keeping the top 20 centimetres.
Ah,
It's
right.
got all the environmental
Right,
organisms in it.
right.
And then we want to find out whether this is a pile or a post, and whether it goes down a heck of a long way, or it's going to stop
Right.
conveniently in our trench.
You're going to keep this in order then? You take the stones off in one lot, and then you give the next layer to be sieved.
Imagine this as the turf on any other normal site.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to put it back just as it was.
Ah! But there it is.
That's the edge of your post.
That is the timber.
Yeah. Different sort of digging, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice big timber.
Yeah.
Every minute we have on this foreshore is vital, and the field walking and metal detecting surveys are already well underway. But lack of time isn't the only problem we face. The Thames has got notoriously treacherous undercurrents, so we have to have a safety boat on permanent standby. And then there's the ever-present risk of Viles disease, the potentially lethal virus carried by the rats that live along the river. It seems an awful lot of hassle for a very little hole. Mick, that is pathetic. It's got to be the smallest trench we've ever dug on Time Team. What's the point of that?
Well, there are two reasons really. One is we're not allowed to dig a big area because this is a sensitive environment. The Environment Agency don't want too many big holes. But secondly, we don't actually need to because this is a hole to get samples from so that we can take them away and work on them in the lab. So it's really a test pit to get environmental samples from. It's more scientific archaeology.
This scientific archaeology includes taking sample cores of what's below the modern foreshore surface.
0 to 8. Unit 2.
When we digitally map these results, we should be able to strip away the last 3,500 years to come up with a 3D picture of the Bronze Age landscape of Vauxhall.
Silt 1, sand 1.
See there?
In Trench 1, the area around our timber has now caught our attention.
It's got lots and lots of little powdery bits of sand, and this is all clay with wood. So it's just possible.
It looks like we've found a post hole. This is important evidence as we try to work out what our structure may be. If we've got posts, timbers placed in a hole and then packed with earth, then that would suggest a structure built on dry land. But if they're piles, sharpened timbers driven into the ground, then we could be looking at a structure built over water.
I think to be able to pile something of that size, you'd need some piece of kit, wouldn't you? I mean, wouldn't it be a lot easier to actually dig a hole? Wouldn't it make more sense to dig a hole?
It would be much easier to dig it if you didn't have the tide coming up and sloshing around. You can't dig a hole if the water table is filling it up with water all the time.
We obviously need more time to solve this riddle, but as the minutes tick by, the tide continues to drop, revealing a second timber we want to investigate.
We need to get the walkboards just outside your half-metre stretch so that we're not churning it up.
Investigating Trench 1 in the time available is pushing us to the limit, but the window of opportunity for Trench 2 must break all Time Team records.
I've got about 45 minutes, I think, for the tide changes.
And what do you want to try and achieve by then?
We want to find out whether this pile is the same as the one over there in the way that it's been set into the ground, see the tool marks and see how deep it is.
If we can get it out today, is that what we're going to try and do?
No, I'm going to half section it today, and then we can backfill the hole with clean gravel in bags, whip that out tomorrow, and we can carry on down.
Are you confident?
I don't know how deep it is. I honestly don't know. It could be huge.
While a bemused Barney ponders just what's physically possible with only 30 minutes digging time, the incident room is an oasis of calm. Here, the less physical arts of archaeology are beginning to play their part in solving the mystery of the Vauxhall structure, including Henry's 3D map of the present foreshore.
It's all over the place. So what we have is the high ground here at the top of the foreshore, running down, well, into the river at this edge. And in the red, you can see the corners of the trenches we're excavating. Just to add some context, the black dots are showing the positions of finds made during the field walking.
Oh, this morning?
Yeah.
There's quite a lot turned up there,
all
isn't
from
there?
this morning.
Right. Well, the sooner you can get the position of those fixed into the base map, the better, actually, because I'm trying to establish what might have happened to this piece of ground over a long period of time, and what things might have influenced that piece of ground where the timbers are coming out.
Phil, the tide's turned.
The tide's turned?
Yeah.
My God,
We haven't really got as far as we'd hoped, have we?
Well, I think we're doing very... I mean, this one is probably as much as we would have hoped. This looked very good.
Well, what can you get from this?
Look, we know now that it is definitely a post. It's not been piled in. Look, we've got this beautiful cut of the actual post hole. So somebody's actually dug a hole and put one of the posts in. That was one of our main objectives, to find that out. We've cracked that.
Normally on day one, we're only getting started at this time, but here it's just the opposite.
Well, this is it, believe it or not. This is the end of the first part of our 3-day dig, the fastest one we've ever done on time, team. We've now got just 10 minutes to get off site and record before we all get our feet wet.
The end of our first day's digging leaves us with a tantalising glimpse of the Bronze Age foreshore. Just before the Thames flooded Trench 2, we found some tool marks that suggest we're looking at a timber piled into water. Yet Trench 1 seems to contain a post sunk on dry land. So could the Bronze Age river's edge be somewhere between these two timbers? While we have a well-deserved early lunch, the Thames reclaims our site. After huddling around two small trenches all morning, the rest of day one's tasks are much less claustrophobic. Starting with Stuart, who thinks that our potential bridge may not have spanned the whole river, but crossed to an island.
What other evidence is there at the Thames for islands existing in the Bronze Age?
Well, we know there were islands here. For example, that building over there, the Houses of Parliament, that actually was on an island. A lot of people wish it still was. That island is Thorney Island, which was formed by the River Tyburn, which came in and demarked the sides of that particular island.
Right.
We're wondering if the river, which is very close to our site, the Effra, whether that had a number of different channels which would have formed a series of islands there as well. And if we can define an island, that could be an important trading position, an important administrative position, an important stronghold.
Yeah.
And it could be a jumping off point. Instead of building a bridge right the way across the Thames, you could build a bridge from the land to an island, to another island, and then island hop all the way over.
So it's actually quite important for us to try and work out where the courses of these rivers actually are, see how they relate exactly to the find.
As Stuart continues on his jaunt down the Thames, I've returned to our now flooded site to take a closer look at the spearheads that sparked this investigation.
I don't understand why these are such good dating evidence for those posts. If you look at the force of that water, surely they could have come from anywhere upriver.
Well, that's true, I suppose, in a way, Tony, but the thing is, I think if we talked, as we did, to the original finder, the point he made was that the big spearhead had been jammed point down, quite hard into the foreshore, quite deep. Right. The other spearhead had been put at a slighter angle.
Francis, what do you think was going on here?
The fact that they're a pair is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, big one, little one, his and hers, who knows? But they were put in the ground on purpose as an offering.
Are we talking about the same sort of activity that you have at Flag Fen that you run, where you seem to be having things thrown into the waters as offerings?
Yes, I'm sure they were. Yes, I'm convinced that's what happened. And that's incidentally why I think the spear shaft was broken out.
Right.
It's been deliberately removed. They've been defaced, if you like. They've been killed.
So you'd expect this structure we're getting down here to be some sort of platform rather than a functional bridge or something, would you?
Well, I don't think in the past anything was ever simple. A bridge. Right. I think it was a mixture of a bridge and, say, Westminster Abbey.
Right.
There are different elements. So it was the crossing that mattered.
Meanwhile, Phil's moved upriver to the wetland centre at Barnes. This sanctuary, run by the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, is a remarkably apt location to test out how our Bronze Age timbers may have been secured into the Vauxhall foreshore.
Oh, Damon, you've got a much nicer spot than we have down in Vauxhall.
much more Bronze Age, I think.
It's absolutely gorgeous out there, it really is. I mean, this is the way I sort of see central London in the Bronze Age. Sort of reed beds and all the rest of it. But what on earth is all this,
here's a rough sketch that might give you an idea. What we got here is, we've got this issue of we're not sure whether the timbers in the river are piles driven in or post set in the hole yet, but we think that there would be some piles further out in the river because of the water. So
we're looking is a Bronze Age pile driver.
Exactly. With the Bronze Age repertoire of techniques that we know about from the boat finds and so on, we've put this together and we're trying to make a simple pile driving rig using the kinds of materials available.
So basically we've got a big lump of wood, which is that.
Yeah, big lump of oak.
And you've got a beautifully constructed hole in here.
Well, they didn't have drills in the Bronze Age. They had to use tools like this little gouge here, a rounded chisel.
Right. And then here you've got, this is the actual framework itself.
Two legs of the tripod. This is the third leg which we're going to put in when we rear the thing up. Here we've made a very primitive kind of block without a pulley, without a wheel in it. It's just got a rounded hole, and we hope that the rope pulling the big ram weight up that will drive the timber will run through.
That is to me, that's a very sophisticated invention. Do we know that they had anything quite as sophisticated?
We don't know. No, we don't know exactly. We know we found lots of Bronze Age timbers with slots in like this.
Right.
We know they used rope to tie things together. We know they drove piles, so it's plausible.
As Phil gets to grips with his Bronze Age tackle and Stuart delves into the topographical history of London, there's very little the rest of us can do but wait for the Thames to once again reveal our site.
It's the end of day one. It's phenomenal how much the tide's risen since we were down on the foreshore.
Yes, it must be at least 20 feet above our heads now.
What have we learned from today?
Quite a lot. I'm very pleased. Phil found the post pit around that timber, which therefore proves it's a post. So tomorrow we've got to empty that post hole out, look at the fill, see if there's any Bronze Age or any artefacts in there, hopefully Bronze Age. And also we want to look into the fill to see if there's any environmental evidence in there to help us tell whether that post hole was cut on the dry land or perhaps in the intertidal zone on the foreshore, on what was the Bronze Age foreshore.
Yeah, I mean, that's what interests me. We've taken lots of samples from out of those holes, and our science people are now looking at those. We shall learn an enormous amount about environmental changes. And in particular, we're trying a technique we've never used before, which is diatom analysis.
What's that?
Well, I'll show you on the microscope tomorrow. It's something to look forward to.
So join us after the break. Tomorrow we're going to lift one of those posts, hopefully, and who knows what we might find underneath. Beginning of day 2 of our dig in central London, where we're investigating some Bronze Age remains under Vauxhall Bridge there. Well, we should be, but it's 9:15, and as you can see, our site's still covered with water, and our diggers can't get across. Gus, you promised us by 8:30 we'd be digging. What's gone wrong?
What's gone wrong is that predicting the tidal movements is not an exact science. We've had a lot of rain last night, and that seems to be delaying the tide going out. I'm very sorry about that.
So I could have got up later, in fact.
You could have had a double breakfast.
Does that mean we'll have a shorter window in which to dig, or that we'll just start later?
I think it means we start later and stay on the foreshore later.
And are we going to try and get one of these posts out today?
We are going to try to do some post-excavation today.
Oh, that's an archaeologist's joke. I think the tide's going down. Come on.
It is.
Come on.
It is.
Yesterday's dig was so intense that this morning's extra weight for the tide has put everyone on edge. But finally, the moment of truth arrives. Have our partly excavated posts survived the night?
What sort of state's it in then, Barney?
Oh, it's excellent.
Yeah? It
Despite
hasn't
these-
suffered any...
No, not at all.
Yeah?
And it's got the added benefit of a nice clean wash overnight.
Yes.
Not only is the timber in good nick, but it now looks like the Thames is going to compensate us for our late start.
Great news. The Environment Agency has just said that it's going to be a low tide today, 15 centimetres lower than normal.
Brilliant. That's unusual.
But how much time does that give us?
It could give us 15 minutes more.
15 minutes?
Oh, I thought it would be much more. It's going to be like half a day.
Oh, look, Tony, be grateful for small mercies. Look, we got 2 hours. An extra 15 minutes, what's that, another 8?
The downside is that they reckon it's going to be a higher tide tomorrow.
Ah, so that is...
You win some, you lose some.
It does mean that today is the day when we've really got
to go for it.
Yeah.
Although we'll continue to survey and take core samples from around the site, most of today's work on the foreshore will concentrate on removing the timber from Trench 1. While we prepare for our excavation, Stuart and Kikar Singh from Graphics are up on Vauxhall Bridge working on the graphic reconstruction of how our site would have looked 3,500 years ago.
We've got this 1681 map that shows 2 rivers actually coming into the Thames here, which might indicate our site was on an island. The northern river here is, see where the chap is on the ladder?
Yeah.
That's where that came in.
Okay.
And the other one is just to the right of the block of flats. See where the quayside curves round? Yeah. Now, what I'd like to do is get a graphic which allows us to patch that together and getting an impression of the area at the time.
The work to remove the timber in Trench 1 has now begun in earnest. It's important to know whether we're dealing with a post or a pile here, as it will help us determine what our structure is. Yesterday, we were convinced we were looking at a post, but now we're not so sure.
You can actually see some very nice tool marks coming up at the bottom there. So either that's the beginning of a point, or it's simply where they've trimmed the bottom, but I think it may actually be the beginning of a point. You can see these tiny little fluted convolutions there. They come up a few centimetres above the water, just there. You see that? Something is beginning to happen. We may be coming close to an end now, hopefully. Brilliant.
And Damien's also found evidence that the finishing touches to our structure may have been carried out in situ.
Wood chips like this is an oak chip, possibly from working timbers like that for the bridge. But if you've got, if you like, construction debris, then that may be giving you a surface from which the work was going on, roughly, although obviously it's going to be trampled around. There's a biggish piece of oak there. That blue-black stuff looks like oak timber.
How do you know that's oak, Damien?
Well, because you can see the medullary rays in it very clearly. These faint lines, can you see they're 0.5 millimetre wide? Those are the medullary rays, and they're very distinctive to oak.
What are they?
They're, if my face is a log for a minute, there's the pith in the middle. These are they're cells which form lines radiating out from the pith. They're very distinctive in oak, and so it's a very easy species or pair of species to recognise. We've got 2 native oaks.
Elsewhere on the site, our coring results are helping us to build up a picture for the Bronze Age foreshore.
But this unit here it's an organic mud. It's a semi-terrestrial surface. People could have walked on it or built from it.
Oh, right.
We've lost a bit. It's eroded here.
But
we've got plant remains in here.
I can see the bits of vegetation in there.
I think this is part of older trees which have been growing on this surface here, and they've preserved nicely. So this is what I think is the surface roughly contemporary with the structure being built. So a mid-Bronze Age date. We have lost a little bit, but I think it's from around this horizon.
So what would that have looked like at the time?
Well, what we have to envisage really is, I suppose, if you don't have any of this gravel here, but instead you've got vegetation, so you've got some low-lying shrubby plants, but you've also got these older bushes growing as well. So you've got a vegetative foreshore, and it's gradually sloping down from what we've seen in all these cores. So much nicer than this.
We want to know as accurately as possible what 1500 BC Vauxhall looked like, which means we need to know the sort of plants and trees that grew here. So we've sent a small team 20 miles down the Thames to Erith in Kent to survey the fantastically preserved remains of a Bronze Age forest.
Well, we're going to basically concentrate in this area because we know it's going to be Bronze Age, so it's going to be contemporary with the Vauxhall structure. We don't want to go anywhere down there because the way the foreshore's eroding at the moment means that that's all actually Neolithic woodland down there. So we're going to concentrate up here. What I think we'll do is we'll just number the trees 1, 2, 3, 4 as we go along. I'll take the diameters of the trunks or stumps and radio that through to you, and you can put that straight on.
Okay, shall we sample?
By measuring, surveying and taking samples from the stumps and roots on this site, we can build up a very good representation of how woodland would have looked along the Bronze Age Thames. Woodland that would have provided the raw material for our structure.
There we go, the ground surface has been eroded away from these buttresses, so the ground surface would have been around here. It looks very much like an oak tree, and it's not a huge one either. So I guess it's very much the size of the ones which were being used at Vauxhall for the construction there.
Has anyone got any idea how long we've got?
Well, the lady from the Environment Agency says there's not going to be very much slack tide, so once it turns, it'll come in.
So any minute now?
Any minute.
Anyone else want to go?
Back on site, we've barely an hour to go, and this race against time means we have to concentrate all our efforts on the attempt to lift the post in Trench 1, which means unfortunately Trench 2, right on the edge of the river, has been officially closed down.
Just beginning to move as you're leaving with the shovel.
Is it moving, Phil?
I think it is actually, Tony. I mean...
Oh, it's definitely wobbling.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we can get rid of some of this clay around it. It's really sticking to it.
We want to keep it protected on this side, Phil.
Why don't you want to dig all the way round?
Because then the whole thing will just come out and we'll be left
Don't we
with
want it to come out?
Yeah, but we want it to come out in a controlled fashion. If we take the stuff away on all sides, it's just going to fall.
So you're going to dig down
one side, free it up, then attach something that will brace it.
Yeah.
Then dig down the other side, free it up, same again, and then lift it out.
In 35 minutes?
That's the theory.
Keep digging.
Is it worth taking out another water?
Damien, have a look down here. Some of them are starting to think that there's evidence that it's narrowing to a point. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's plausible. We had a false alarm earlier where we saw some tool marks higher up, perhaps where they were just removing a bulge, and hopefully this is not that.
Yeah.
And it is actually tapering into a point. It certainly does start to look like that. Now, if this pile is like some of the others we've seen from further up the river, smaller ones, then I would imagine you've got a good half a metre to go yet, at least.
Another half metre, Phil? We had
Yeah.
such high hopes this morning to get this out. But time and tide wait for no man, not even the mighty forces of Time Team.
Phil, if that's moving, won't it come out? Well, I mean, the trouble of it is, I mean, it's literally flexing at the minute, Mick. Yeah. And I mean, with this clay and the amount of water is just sucking around it. So even if you tried to pull it out, it would still... We're afraid that if we flex it too much, it'll snap in half. So it doesn't look like today, does it?
So close and yet so far. To dig down almost 1.5 meters in such difficult conditions and still not get the timber out has been a major disappointment. How are we going to look after it for the next 24 hours?
What we're going to do, once it's been cleaned, photographs have been taken, some plastic wrapping is going to be put around it to protect it from tool marks. Then we're going to put buckets at the bottom and the gravel bags on top of that. That should protect it quite nicely and obviously make it easier to get out tomorrow.
We now have only one digging window left. The clock's also ticking for our lab-based archaeology, but we're starting to get promising results. First up are the coring samples we took from the Bronze Age level of the foreshore, and specifically the mysterious diatoms that Mick promised me yesterday. Diatoms, what are they?
They're microscopic algae that are of interest to people who are interested in sediments because they have a silica skeleton which can be preserved.
That's that feathery-looking thing?
Yes, it is. That's the edge of the diatom, and in the middle you'll see the ornamentation of the centre. This is a diatom that you find in estuaries between the sea and the top of the tidal head of the river.
So how significant is it that we're on or near the tidal head?
Very significant. This is actually new news. It was only just a few years ago that it was suggested the tidal head was as far upstream as Westminster in the Bronze Age.
Well, we're a few hundred yards upstream from that.
And now we've moved up upstream from that, so this is a first for Time Team. We've actually put the tidal head further upstream.
And what does it imply about our structure?
Oh, well, this is important. The tidal head is that point at which the river runs backwards halfway through the day and then forwards again, so it's a very magic place. So it's important for the ritual argument, but it's also important for the economic argument, because that's the point at which vessels can be swept upstream on an incoming tide, can offload their cargoes, and then be swept downstream on the outgoing tide.
So this evidence doesn't tell us what the thing is, but it tells us why it is where it is.
A splendid summary, yes.
Well, that's right.
No avenue of investigation seems to be too small or too big for our recreation of what was going on at Bronze Age Vauxhall. Stuart's taken Mick to the London Eye for a 450 feet and 3,500 year overview of the site.
I've been looking through historical maps, and although you might not think maps have a great deal to do with the Bronze Age, they actually have, because one of the earliest maps is 1680.
Yeah.
And that's long before any of this developed, when the landscape was actually still visible to the cartographers of that day.
Yeah.
And what it shows is that there were two fairly major river channels coming in towards the site that we're working on.
And are these rivers that are lost now? Or?
Yeah, they're another of London's lost rivers. As the buildings were built up, particularly during the Victorian period, and big expansion in railways and industrial sites and so on, these river channels were still fast flowing, and they had to culvert them under the buildings.
Right.
And London's actually got quite a lot of rivers which flow underground now. And there clearly was some
something
towards
in our
our
area.
site. Yeah. At the moment I'm following that through, but it does look at the moment as if we're heading towards a scenario where our site actually sat on an island, like a triangular island.
Oh, so not just a bit where the river is, but going back in sort of what
That's
is inland.
right, it's
now.
sat between two channels.
Right.
And another thing which is relevant to that particular area is that from the north side there is another river channel, it's a branch of the river which formed the island here at Thorney,
Right.
which went that way.
Yeah.
So not only have you got two rivers coming in on that side of the jetty or bridge, but on the opposite side you've got a river coming in as well. So you've actually got a river dynamic where you've got a bend and you've got channels coming in from the opposite side. Well, the effect that has on water flows, tidal water, upsetting the currents and eddies, all that is relevant to trying to understand that site. And I've been working with Jane to try.
Back at Vauxhall, we're starting to peel away 3.5 millennia of this Thames foreshore, thanks to the coring samples that provided the diatoms.
What we've done now is the data that I've collected and logged on the shore, we've dumped into the computer, and we've now got a plot of the topography below the surface that we actually walk over. This has shown some quite surprising things.
Although the modern foreshore is fairly straight at Vauxhall, our digital map shows the Bronze Age waterfront as an embayment, with our structure starting on much more solid ground and then rapidly extending into the Thames.
So the river's pulling further towards the shore than we thought it would. We'd assumed that this structure would have been built almost on a promontory sticking out into the river, and it's actually the reverse. So I'm rather surprised about this. And we've had a chat with Stuart about his modelling of the various rivers, and we have more of an idea why this might have happened, although it's come as rather a surprise.
Jane and Stuart have now got only a matter of hours to refine their theory. Meanwhile, Phil's returned to the Wetland Centre with Damien to try and recreate the techniques used to make the post we've been attempting to lift.
Is this the sort of job, do you reckon, that they would have done on the foreshore, or would they have actually made the timbers and then carted them down to the river?
I think they might have done some of this trimming before they got to where they were going to use it. And probably cut joints and things like that down there rather than do the basic trimming, because it makes the timber lighter and easier to slide and handle. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I'd love to have a go. Oh.
Well, another thing we can try is the same kind of blade, hafted in a different way as an adze.
Oh, you've got one of those, haven't you?
Yeah, well, we've looked at some woodwork which suggests they were using them hafted like this, putting a handle in this way. So you've got your axe there, and there's the...
So that's the axe with the blade parallel with the handle.
Yeah, and this is
the
set crosswise.
adze set there crosswise.
Yeah.
So, Damien, why did they go to all the trouble to take the bark off?
Well, I think there are two probable reasons for that. One is to make it easier to drive the piles, make it smoother, less friction. The other is the bark's a real home to the fungi and beetles that decay the wood, so it'll make the timber last longer. Well, you're nearly there, Phil.
I reckon we am, Damien.
Yeah, it's really starting to look like the timber on the foreshore at Vauxhall now. I mean, you look at this area here particularly, you look at that fluting there, rather faint but definitely clear, and that's really almost exactly what we've got there.
They are actually, yeah, exactly like that.
Mick?
Yeah?
See that log floating away?
Yeah,
It's not one of ours, is it?
Well, no, I looked at it and it looks remarkably like one, but I don't think it is. It's got pitch or something on it. We just hope not.
We were thwarted today.
Yeah, but we'll carry on tomorrow.
We're going to get there?
Well, I think my main worry is that I think to get it out in one piece, which is what we want to try and do, is going to be very difficult. There are obviously some sort of ancient cracks in it. You notice that when Kerry was working down there, the whole thing was sort of...
It was really moving, wasn't it?
Yeah, wobbling, and I think there must be some cracks across it. And so I've got my fingers crossed.
So tomorrow we're going to get that massive pile out of there at last, aren't we?
Yeah.
Join us after the break, aren't we?
7:30 day 3, and London's already a blur of activity. Apart, that is, from our incident room near Battersea Power Station, where the elements have conspired against us.
The rain's been tipping down. We've lost all our electricity except for this one power line, which we've run off the security guard's hut, so we can get this computer working to allow Kicker and Stuart to finish their work, which could be vital. Mick, is all this an omen?
Well, we seem to be struggling a bit with the water, don't we? One way or another.
Not half.
But it's all beginning to come together. We've got the coring results from Jane.
Yeah.
And that's produced a lot of interesting results. And we're waiting for Stuart to finish the mapping. But both of them seem to be coming together with a really rather interesting, exciting theme. So we need to get here early so they can get on with that before we get down on the beach.
How long before we can start digging?
Well, I think probably about an hour and a half, so we've got time to sort that.
And are we going to get that flipping post up
I
today?
hope so, yeah, that's what we're here for, isn't it, really?
The Bronze Age timber may be the focus of our diggers' work, but we're utilising just about every other form of archaeological investigation to try and work out what's going on here.
Phil, come and have a look at this lot. This was found when we were doing the shore walking.
Yeah?
Any of it Bronze Age? Is that yes or no?
No. No, I'm afraid this is all a lot earlier than the Bronze Age.
So what sort of date are we looking at?
Well, I mean, with cores like this, Mesolithic, sort of maybe 8,000-10,000, right through to about 4, something like that.
So several thousand years before.
And the rest of it, you've got a bit of flint axe there, polished flint axe, Neolithic, first farmers and settlers around here.
How can you be so confident that this is Stone Age and not Bronze Age?
Totally different way of working the flint, Tony. I mean, no Bronze Age person was capable of making regular blades like that. No way.
How would they make blades?
They wouldn't make blades. They were just basically taking a piece of flint and knocking flakes off and making the tools out of that. It's a much poorer quality of technology.
So that suggests no settlement near to the structure at all.
If the Bronze Age people were still living around here, they'd be using flint.
Yeah, yeah.
So people lived on our site during the Stone Age, but they left before the Bronze Age structure was erected. That rules out the theory that it's a building, leaving us with either a jetty or a bridge. It now seems the key to understanding our structure is working out how the Thames interacted with the land around it 3,500 years ago. Yesterday, our analysis of the coring results and microscopic diatoms suggested that the tidal head of the river reached Vauxhall during the Bronze Age. And now Stuart thinks he's completed the jigsaw by recreating the paths of some of London's lost rivers, including the two arms of the River Effra that surrounded our site.
As you can see on here, the northern channel comes into the Thames up here, just below Vauxhall Bridge. And this southern channel, which is the most important one, comes out and there's our site. So our timber structure is right on the edge of where this southern channel would hit the Thames, and that fits in with the sample data that Jane and Henry have put together. It all starts to match. The other point to make about that really is that, to simplify it, you've got the Thames like that. We've got these two channels I've been talking about coming down like that. Our site is here. On the opposite side we have a channel of the Tyburn. And all three, in effect, come in more or less together. Now, the effect of that could be on the main river flows. As the river comes down, it hits the waters coming in from these channels and starts to eddy, starts to swirl round. And the effect of that is to make the river, in effect, drop sediment and sand and so on in that it's carrying, which would create a gravel bank or a sand bank in the middle of the Thames.
That seems to suggest to me that it could still either be a ritual structure because there's something strange happening with the river here, or it could be a bridge because if you've got gravel island and so on, then you've got an easier way of perhaps getting from one shore to the island and then from that island to another one or back to the other shore.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's a good crossing point, in fact.
If we have an island in the middle, it could be a bridge to the island rather than necessarily a bridge right across the river. So it's the island that might be important.
It feels like we're getting warm. What do we do next?
I think we get cold. I think we have to go out on the foreshore and get very wet and try and finish our study of this particular area.
While Graphics sets about recreating Stuart's model of Bronze Age Vauxhall, the modern-day Thames has receded enough to let us back onto the foreshore and the partly excavated post that we carefully packed yesterday.
Is it moving?
But it doesn't look good.
I think it's moved in the night.
It looks more as if it's further over to me.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Is that all right?
Ish.
In fact, it's not all right. As we remove the last gravel bags from the trench, we find that our worst fears have been realised. This is a real disappointment for our diggers, who've worked harder and faster than they've ever had to before.
Right, we got it. Well,
But it doesn't look like there's anything we could have done to prevent the timber snapping.
Look, it's an incredibly old crack. Look, I mean, there's no way that would have stayed
been lucky,
up.
wouldn't we?
Well,
It's
already broken.
Yeah.
It's just.
I think if we just get it out from here, I'll then wet it down and bubble wrap it up on the foreshore so it'll be safe there.
Shall I give you this bit as well?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
Somebody support it onto these.
Although this setback has cost us almost half of today's digging time, we're not giving up yet. As we try to remove the rest of the timber, the fresh silt on the wood still in the ground shows how big the crack was. We'd never have got it out in one piece.
Have a look at this, Damien.
Well, we've got fairly clear, shallow marks here. Quite narrow and quite rounded, as we've been seeing earlier. We can see them more clearly now. And there's another bit, I think, down here, isn't there? A chance to hold that up. Let's have a look. You see, the blue stuff isn't paint, it's an iron mineral called vivianite, and it shows up the marks rather well. Very narrow. They're actually only about 30 millimetres wide. Very small tools that they're using, very light. These little marks here are what we call in-cuts, where the tool's been swung in at an angle to chip up the bark into sections to pull it off, and you use the tool at a steep angle, then you use it at a shallow angle. So you get the two kinds of marks. It's quite normal to see that. And there's another big crack here. I mean, this is going to have to be really carefully supported, otherwise it's going to fissure all over the place. But something I think has given that a big thump. That's the problem with all the structures along the river. As the banks erode, they become vulnerable to this damage from river traffic and even people standing on them.
John, how do you know that this is older?
Well, this is a cross-section through the stem. Okay, well, we have the porcelain.
Up in the incident room, the final results of the Erith Bronze Age forest are now being incorporated into our reconstruction of Vauxhall 1500 BC.
What we've seen at Erith is that the slightly higher ground on the site there is supporting the dryland trees such as oak, ash, elm and cherry. So presumably if this is a higher gravel area, you're going to have these dryland species growing up here, and then the alder fringing the rivers as you come down onto the River Thames.
Along these minor rivers we'll have reeds, but then there will be a narrow strip of high reeds along the Thames, probably either side of the platform.
The archaeological puzzle that's Bronze Age Vauxhall is almost complete. We just hadn't had enough time to get the rest of the timber out of Trench 1, but the very final mattocking of this dig seems to have answered the question that's bugged us since the start of day one. Was this wood a post or a pile?
Let's have a look at that. That chunk you've just knocked off.
Well, that's
you see, it is just a faint. But I don't think. I mean, that's too small to be a post hole.
That's like what you do if you drove it in.
There's the edge of the timber. That is far too shallow a distance to represent a post hole.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I reckon certainly by here we could well be into pile drilling.
Part of our project design demands we restore the foreshore to its previous state. And as it's such an environmentally sensitive area, that includes replacing the timber we've removed with the one Phil and Damien made yesterday.
I reckon we did a good job there.
What do you mean? I'm worn out. Oh, yeah. Well, it's only a 2-hour working day.
Well, at least we got our own stake in the Thames.
Oh, how long is that going to last, you think?
But it ain't 3,000 years.
How long are we going to last?
We're going to get off, haven't we?
But although the Thames has reclaimed one of the strangest time team digs we've done, the work's not over yet.
It was extraordinarily difficult getting even half of that timber out, which goes to show, I suppose, how difficult it must have been for the Bronze Age people to get it in the first place.
Yes, that was a very substantial structure, not just temporary works. And we've learned that it clearly wasn't a fish trap unless they were catching whales, and it certainly wasn't a dry land building. And we've come to the conclusion it must be either a very long jetty or a bridge.
John, from your point of view, was this whole exercise worth anything?
Very much so, I think, Tony, because it's helped put into context a little bit more of the Bronze Age landscape in the London region. I mean, this, for us, is pretty much a unique structure. We've got nothing else quite like this in the capital. But what it does, as far as I'm concerned, it links the river with the dry land. What's happening out there in midstream? Have we got a midstream island or something? What's happening behind us? Have we got settlement activity? Have we got fields, droveways, all this sort of thing?
What do you reckon was going on here?
I wish I had the answer to that. Whatever it was, I think it was very, very complicated. It was a crossing place, probably, yeah. But we know now of about 10 or 12 of these strange crossing place sites in Britain from the Bronze Age. And nearly all of them have some element of religion. So you'll find perhaps bits of human bones and bodies and broken metalwork and pots that have been smashed and that sort of thing. They're making offerings to the ancestors, I think. But there must have been a very strong motivation to take two beautiful objects like those spearheads, break the hafts off them, and then offer them to the waters.
Our dig concentrated on a claustrophobic 1 square metre trench, but we've gathered our evidence from locations along a 20-mile stretch of the River Thames. So what does all this information tell us? Well, the oak timbers were piles driven into the Bronze Age foreshore. They may have supported a jetty for votive offerings to a newly tidal river that had dramatically changed the landscape at Vauxhall. But I prefer to think the evidence suggests that they belong to the oldest known bridge on the Thames. Today, the foreshore is a mass of concrete and stone, but 3,500 years ago it would have been lined with reeds, and our bridge would have connected the island formed by the two arms of the River Effra to an island created by the swirling confluence of the Effra, Tyburn and Thames. Now we build right up to the water's edge, but then there were no people living here. They'd all moved inland towards a forest of alder and oak. And all of this in a place that is now London, but then would have been a land of floodplains, marshes, and scattered communities.
We need someone on the other side watching the foot. Just put your foot on it if it slides too much.
We've discovered so much over the last 3 days of this unique time team dig, but we still have one last challenge. Can we recreate how the timbers of our Bronze Age structure were secured so firmly into the Vauxhall foreshore?
8 people, who knows? Depending on the length. Yep, you want to drop your end? Watch out.
There's ground level. And where should we say? There.
No, if you're doing this properly, you probably have a series of tails. I did bring enough rope. Rest it on the path. You might need a touch more. Still a bit wonky, isn't it? No, that's better.
You think that's all right?
Well, when it stops swinging, yeah. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yes. Brilliant. Look, that's almost gone down one. Yeah. One graduation. Yeah.
What does that mean in units? Bronze Age inches.
Well,
yes,
it's like about one Bronze Age inch. It's about 2 fingers. Oh yeah, that's typically you.
So a victory for Bronze Age engineering, and just an idea of the Herculean task that must have faced the people who built London's first bridge.
So I count to 3.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yes. Look at that.